Welcome everyone to Shift with CJ. Today, I've got a special guest for you. What makes him special? So many things, but one of the most important thing is that he has a mindset like us. He is a biohacker, and I love talking to people who are immersed in the science and technology and people who practice it themselves daily. My guest on today's show is from Germany. He's an internationally known strength coach. He has also appeared as a cover model in many fitness magazines, such as Muscle Flex, and has also come on some other biohacking shows and has appeared in one of the famous books called Tools of Titan. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to leave everything after the podcast and order that book. Now, he's also invented tools that help people achieve their fitness goals, such as the bamboo bench. He is a blogger, he owns a supplement brand, and what I found most interesting about him is that he is also involved in alternative styles of medicine. Now, Bernard, welcome to the show.
CJ, thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here and share ideas and create new ways of thinking. And I encourage before we start every listener and viewer to question everything I tell. So don't take anything for granted. Nothing is, as we say in German, chiseled in stone. So question everything and create.
Amazing, I love that because from questioning comes curiosity, and curiosity sparks new ideas and is great for learning, everyone. Now, first thing first, I want to know how to pronounce your name right because I was trying to understand. I was like, because as you know, he is from Germany, guys, and the name wasn't as clear. So, how do you pronounce your name?
Well, my first name is pronounced Bernd. So, and when you speak English, so it is when you try to say the word burned, like the third form of to burn, it is slightly the same, but it is Bernd and the surname is Stößlein. So in literally translated, this means little punch or little hit.
Interesting. So, that is interesting. Now, while looking at your profile, I have already mentioned in the introduction so many great things, but also I came across another difficult term to pronounce, which I'm going to try to pronounce it. Heilpraktiker?
Well, no, it's Heilpraktiker, which literally translated means heal practitioner. And let me explain this because this is a rather unique thing you can only find in Germany and with some restrictions in Switzerland. So a heal practitioner is something like a medical doctor, but with restrictions. So a appropriate translation could be complementary and alternative medicine practitioner. That means I'm allowed from a juristically standpoint to treat and diagnose diseases with restrictions, of course, and I'm allowed to do things like injections, infusions, and all that stuff. So this is something that is unique in Germany, that you can treat and diagnose diseases with restrictions without being a medical doctor. So, and I did that to enhance my work as a strength coach, respectively personal trainer, because being a personal trainer or a strength coach in Germany, what you are able to do is restricted. So, for example, you could do acupressure, but no acupuncture, because even with this, the thin needles, you have to pierce the skin. So it is declared as an invasive technique. And you can only do this in Germany when you're a medical doctor or what we call a Heilpraktiker.
Okay, so I want to know, what are these restrictions that we're talking about?
Concerning diagnosing and treating diseases as a
heal practitioner. So talk to me about some of these restrictions that apply for you as a heal practitioner.
Okay, so some of the restrictions are that you are not allowed to prescribe drugs that need prescription by a medical doctor. So we have several laws in Germany. For example, there's a law called infection law, which regulates which diseases are in this particular law. And if a disease is in this law, you are prohibited to treat it. So, for example, you have a sexual transmitted disease. you are not allowed to treat it as a heal practitioner, but you must be able to recognize, respectively diagnose it, and then you have to report it to the Department of Health. So this is a restriction, for example, or you're not allowed to do some methods like X-rays and stuff like that. So, but you have a lot of things you are allowed to do compared to everything else, like a nurse or a strength coach or personal trainer. So because you are allowed generally to work invasive, and invasive could be anything from using acupuncture or use syringe and do infusions, invasions, and stuff like that.
So then, are you trained also like a medical practitioner in certain medical sciences such as physiology, pathology, let's say anatomy, well,
Yes.
which you have been trained because you're a strength coach. But apart from that, what specific kind of alternative medicine do you practice? Are you working with people on acupuncture, or is it energy medicine, or is it some Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine?
Well, generally you're allowed to do all of that, but then you must decide when you go to the Heilpraktiker school, and then you have to pass 2 exams, and after that you are not a heal practitioner, what I say, you're a heal theorist, and then you must start to decide in which field you go. So, and for me, coming from the background of being a strength coach, I used a lot of stuff that goes into the field of, let's say, manual therapy. This is something like called kinetic chain enhancement. So when I work with athletes, so for me, everyone is an athlete. It doesn't have to be if someone has the intention to go to a competition. So I work with them, and then I always say it's like having tools in the toolbox. So the toolbox is the toolbox of health, if you want, and the tools are things like manual therapy, gua sha, acupuncture, acupressure, and then I take all the techniques I've learned and apply the ones who will benefit you the most right now. So let's say someone comes and I have to do a diagnose first, so an assessment, and then I can see what I can correct. So if someone who's training, I will see, okay, do you have some structural balance issues, for example? And then you must see, okay, is it a symptom or is it the cause of something? You always will have to look at the root cause and see, okay, if someone has a shoulder impingement or frozen shoulder, for example, so is it really the issue in the tissue in the shoulder, or is it something else that leads to the issue in the tissue in the shoulder? So is the impingement a symptom, or is it rather the root cause of the problem? So, and most often it's the victim that cries, but it's not the one who causes it, you know? So the toolbox is getting bigger and bigger over the years, because you learn new stuff, as you say, from energy medicine to traditional Chinese medicine, for example, and then I take everything I need. I have so much I use, but it would be nonsense to use everything you know with the patients. Like going to a restaurant and they say, I have 100 recipes and on the, not recipes, 100 dishes on the card. So they're probably not all good. So, but if they have 10 dishes on the card, so the 10 are probably good, you know. So you cannot know and work with everything. So, but you can be a generalized, a specialized generalist. So this is my approach. But I cannot work with anything and everything. So if someone comes and says, for example, okay, I want to be a better triathlete, I can make him stronger, that he has a proper way of running and stuff like that, but not an expert in training triathletes, for example.
So when you're training, for people who have never heard the term kinetic chain enhancement and kinetic chain movement, so when I think of this, my question is, does this series of movement where you use other tools like the gua sha or cupping or something else, does this have to happen before an athlete starts training with you? Does it happen between training, or does it happen after training?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So to answer that is, it depends, as always.
Mm-hmm.
So in an ideal world that does not exist, I would approach this that an athlete comes. So then, ideally, I've done an assessment before, so I can see it. So if not, I will do the assessment, because the assessment starts the moment you walk into my practice, because I see how you work, how you stand, and so on. And then I can decide what to do. And I would suggest doing it before a competition or before the workout, or like I do it to save time and get the most bang for your buck, as the saying goes, in between sets. So it's an intra kinetic chain enhancement. And let me explain why. Because, so let's say, stick to the example I gave you with the frozen shoulder or the impingement. So you have a restricted movement. So let's say you cannot lift the arm without pain, or you have restricted external, internal rotation. So this is like a door. The door has angles, and if the angles are rusty, you cannot open the door properly. So you only can open it to some degree. But so, and now you have the you could slash and slam against the door, or kick your foot against the door and open it forcefully, but this will result in pain and in damage of structure. So what I'm to do is I oil the joints in between, because then you get more blood flow through the tissue, and which is more important is you do a reset of your pain in the brain, because you have a fear reaction. That means if you had issue in the tissue, or damage, or operation, or stuff like that, your tissue gets calcified, and so on and so on. It builds scar tissue, with is practically useless secondary tissue that is built up but has no proper function. And then you must reset the brain, because the brain will imprint a pathway that says, no, you cannot move like this or that, because this will result in fear, and it will prohibit your range of motion, because the brain thinks it has to protect you from wear and tear, because the brain says, no, it was damaged before, so I have to be really careful that it will not happen again. And what I can do with this technique, and the tools and techniques I apply within the technique, is to do it reset in the brain, that you can say, oh no, okay, now I can move like this and that, or I can squat in full range of motion without having the fear of getting injured. So that's basically, in a nutshell, and a very, very short explanation, what kinetic chain does. It is an instant enhancement of range of motion. And when you train after the treatment, because this treatment will not last forever. Let's say the first treatment, it will last something between 6 to 8 hours, and then it vanishes. But if you train after that, after you have a bigger range of motion, you treat your brain and say, okay, now you can do more range of motion, and will save this new range of motion.
Now, when I think of this, whatever you said, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, because we live in a world where everyone is an athlete, but is trying to be a super athlete. So we're not talking about the people who are professional triathloners or marathoners or weightlifters, but the culture that we are going through right now, especially with all the advertising and all these athletes being promoted, more and more people are taking the time to invest in exercising, but they're not taking that same amount of time in investing for nutrition or recovery, and that comes with a cost, right? That cost is you get injured very fast, and then you have, as you mentioned, right, you have all these neuroinhibitory movements where your body just doesn't want you to go and experience pain. So it is the same thing that would happen probably in one of the lowest, if you're using a deadlift, for example. And when you look at the ranges of motion of a deadlift, your weakest range is probably when you're lifting the bar up. Now, at this point, if you have a lot of weight and you just aren't able to lift it up, your brain is just going to tell you to stop. because the weight is probably much heavier. But reality is you can lift that weight, but in a higher degree, let's say from the knee to up or just standing up straight. So it's very interesting to understand that these pathways can actually impact joints. And the way I think of it, the human body is also like a well-trained machine. And like with any machine, you need to have all the components right, which means it should be well oiled like a machine. Otherwise, you get rust, and then these two components will slide against each other, and that will create things like scar tissues and things like that. Now, I'm very happy you mentioned this. For a person who wants to start off with kinetic chain enhancement, and let's say he doesn't have a professional support like yours, what would be one or two of the basic things that people can do? Is foam rolling a part of it? Can you foam roll between exercises and between sets to sort of release the fascia? Does that relate to it as well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a good question. So first of all, let me mention one thing is that, as you said, because you said everyone tries to be an athlete, that's correct. But in our world now, people tend to be overnewsed but underinformed. So that means they get a lot of information, and what is information? It brings you in a new formation. So from a state of mind as well as from a somatic physical point of view. So, and to answer that question, which is a great example, is yes, you can do anything, but the question always remains is only because you can do things and there are exercises, for example, that exist or treatments, it doesn't mean that they're good or respectively good for you now in this particular or special state of being. So to answer your question, yes, of course you could foam roll, but the thing is, it is always better that someone from the outside does the treatment on your body, because you have total different leverage and things like that. So you could foam roll, but the thing is, before foam rolling, I would invest some time in thinking of fascia and not only muscles, so that you get an idea of how fascia works and to know what you're doing. Instead of doing something, invest some time, or invest money and save time by doing it faulty and go to a good practitioner. But which leads us to the next question: what is a good practitioner? But you could do all those things, for example, like gua sha, cupping, as you mentioned, and even foam rolling on yourself. But you have to be aware that, for example, with the foam rolling, you can only apply your own body weight. So you have always to work with your own body weight, like, for example, rolling on your IT band or something like that, so your ilio tract band. But then maybe the pressure is too high, and with foam rolling you have to take care of blood vessels and things like that, that you do not compress too much blood vessels, which could lead to other problems, and then you create more bad, or you cause harm instead of doing good.
Amazing. That is perfectly put. What got you into strength training in the first place?
Well, yeah, so I've always been a sporty person. So I started with the age of 3 and got into professional gymnastics. And then I did some track and field, and then I did, came to classic bodybuilding, even with competition on stage. And I've been doing some Krav Maga, and so it was an evolution. So you get into new things, and I've done a lot of things by myself. So I don't talk the talk, I walk the talk. So I have insight in a lot of fields, and I can draw from this experience. And so, yeah, this is a constant evolution. Yeah.
Okay, very well said. You've also been mentored by the late Charles Poliquin. May his soul rest in peace. And for those of you who don't know who Charles is, he's a great figure in the fitness world, and he's been called the Strength Sensei. He's written phenomenal books on exercise physiology, and he's defined a lot of science in them. He's the guy who made German volume training popular. He's trained so many athletes. So how did you meet Charles? And what's the story there?
Yeah, that's a funny story. So I have been following Charles' work for years and years, and to be honest, I've never dreamt of meeting him in person. And well, then as things go, when you have when you're needy, you develop things. So I came up with the idea of the bamboo bench, and I developed some prototypes. And then as the story goes, is there was a brand, and they had a certain bench to press on that was shaped more narrow, like a normal bench, and they posted it, and Charles shared it on his social media. And then I commented below and said, well, this approach is good. The idea is good, but the approach is not optimal. And then I posted my idea of my product, and that's how ultimately led to meeting Charles. And the first time I met Charles was actually in Germany in 2014, I think, like that. 2014 on the seminar Modern Trends in Hypertrophy. And then we became friends, and or more like he was my mentor, and I'm being the student, and so that's this was awesome. So to have the ability to learn from him and being on seminars, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, all of his work, the kind of knowledge and wisdom and ideas that he's brought to this world is well been embraced by the fitness industry. I've seen some of his work, and I'm really a fan. What would you say would be probably top one or top two things that you have learned from Charles in when you were mentoring under him?
Well, the top things are probably to, as you said, not look at the world through a straw. So, and the other thing is to question everything, to ask questions. So, and I would say that, because
Okay.
this is but because this is can be applied to everything else. Otherwise, I have to just draw some little details the listeners may be not familiar with, and so this is an thinking in principles he taught, and to question everything and not taking things for granted just because someone with a PhD or something like that stated.
Charles was also a big fan of strength. Did he mention a lot of strength regimes, strength protocols? What was his idea on why strength or developing strength is very important for human physiology?
Yeah, he was the most famous and most successful strength coach in history so far, or is still. But as you say, strength is as he said, is the mother of all qualities. So if you want to get stronger, you have to get more flexible, and vice versa. So you cannot gain more yes, you can gain, for example, more flexibility, but then you need the same amount of strength in order to strengthen that flexibility, because otherwise you will lose structural balance. Another term that was coined by Charles, that says you need strength, but you need strength in proper manners. For example, that says it does not, when you're super strong in the bench press, but you lack the equivalent amount of strength for upper body pressing, for example, you will not get stronger in the bench press. So you have to have something that is called structural balance.
And when most of people listen about strength, I can imagine listeners thinking about some person with huge arms and huge chest and huge back, typically what we look at in a hypertrophy kind of a model. Do you think that is correct? Do bigger muscles mean bigger strength? Or is there any caveats to that?
To some point, yes, because there's a difference if you have a 30-inch diameter arm or you have a 55-inch diameter arm. So when you have bigger muscles, you will become stronger, but not to the intent when you focus on strength training. And this is a very good question, because this is the ultimate thing everybody is constantly misunderstanding. Even people who have been for years in the strength industry, they do not get the absolute elementary difference between strength and what you said with the right term is hypertrophy. So hyper means that is more than normal, and trophein in the Greek term means to grow. So hypertrophy is an overgrowth of muscle mass. So in a nutshell, to explain the difference, if you want me to explain it, is if you have, you think of a tube of a rope. Yeah, you have the rope is more or less a tube, and it consists of smaller ropes, which will lead to the bigger what we see as a rope. So strength means that you have the ability to increase what is called intramuscular coordination. So intra means that you can recruit more muscle fibers. So the number of muscle fibers is your genetically given thing. And then, okay, to make it more complicated, you have different types of muscle fibers for different purposes. You have type 1A, type 2B, and type 2X. So some are more fast twitching and others are slow twitching, which you can use for endurance stuff, and the fast twitching stuff is more for strength. So, and when you want to get stronger, you must train your brain to recruit more of the fibers in your rope. So let's say if you would only have 5 little strings in the rope, hypertrophy would mean that you can recruit from your brain to the muscles too. So, and then you can make those 2 bigger. So the whole rope would appear to be bigger because the diameter is enhanced. And strength training means that you recruit 5 of the 5, so that the diameter will not get that much bigger, but you can recruit more of the fibers, which will make you stronger. So, to make a long story short, strength is not the same as hypertrophy, and you can be really strong without looking super strong. Think of some little Chinese weightlifters, for example. They lift a huge amount.
I was just thinking about martial artists and weightlifters.
For example, so that's the biggest difference, and people still don't get it. So they say, no, because he or she looks strong, for example, like a bodybuilder, which is, of course, they are strong, but not as strong, for example, as a power lifter or an Olympic weightlifter. And an Olympic lifter is muscular, of course, but not as muscular as a bodybuilder. So this is the huge difference, and this is the first elementary thing people should get aware of in terms of training, because when you say, okay, there's a difference in your approach and training style depending on your goals.
So that also means that when we're looking at people in the gym and someone who's looking super huge, there is a certain element that adds to it, which is the power to the muscle ratio. So how much, and like you mentioned, right, if you think of Chinese weightlifters or like some Asian martial artists, the amount of power and force that they can generate from that tiny muscle is probably much huge than what someone would generate from a bench press, someone looking big from a bench press. And this is one of the most common misconceptions, and thank you so much for clearing that, because in this part of the world where I'm in, people normally look at people with bigger muscles and they think that they work really hard, and just because that ability to aesthetically look well is a derivative of their hard work in the gym. But then you have gymnasts, for example. Gymnasts create so much pounds of pressure even in the most tiniest areas, and they're working all day long. So sometimes it's not always good to see things at face value, everyone. So if you're listening to this, please pay respects to the strength lifters, the power lifters, everyone. Just because someone is big doesn't mean that they are super strong as well. Now, when we were exchanging a lot of emails back and forth, one of the things that got me most excited to talk to you was your journey with water and what you do in a way to biohack water itself. Now, this, I think, is applicable to everyone because, as we know, water is the source of life. We came back from single cell organisms to multi-cell organisms, and we emerged from water. So, and everyone drinks water. I hope everyone does. So tell me, what are you doing special when it comes to water?
Wow. Okay. Where to begin? So the thing is, I'll give you a brief start. So let's think of that. As you correctly said, we are 99% water. Now I said why 99%? Because as you read, an adult contains of 75, depending on the literature, percent. But think of that. Every molecule has some water. So practically we're 99% water. And think of that. You have skin, you have bones, more dense, more soft structure. But technically, from a chemical point of view, you are a wobbly mass of 99% water. So this declares the importance of drinking water. But water is not water. So in school we learned that water is H2O, so you have hydrogen and oxygen, but it is so much more to that. And after all those years of personal research of water, I come to the conclusion that we don't know nothing about water, really. So, and this is so an interesting topic. And what I do to answer your question is I drink water that is restructured, and I just mention all the things, and then we can go, if you want, into all the details that are of interest for you. So the water is restructured. I will explain that later. So then I use a filter that filters 99.99% of the things you can filter, so with charcoal and stuff like that. So you get rid of all the chemicals, the biocides and everything that might be still in the water, fluoride and stuff like that. So fluoride is not that a big topic in Germany, but in other countries. We can get on this topic, which is of importance later. So, and then I use a water ionizer. So that, what does it mean? In a nutshell, you have platinum plates in this machine, this device, and then the H2O flows into the machine, and then it gets separated in OH minus, so negatively charged electrons, and H plus, which is positively charged protons. So the protons go into the sink, and then you can drink the negatively charged electrons. So, and then it has a module that enriches the water with biophotons. So bio means life in Greek, and photon is the Greek word for light, life. So light, not life. So, and then enrich it with red light. So to create something that is called easy water, which we will come later if you want, a special fourth phase of water. So I drink it. So by drinking this, I've been doing this for 8 years now. Yeah, 8 years, okay. Probably more than 8 years. So, and okay, this is not a health claim, but it's only anecdotal knowledge. I've never been sick since then. So because drinking, it's like drinking antioxidants, yeah, because it is negatively charged. So, and now I've put out a lot of words, and if you want, we can depict that and go into the special things, because it's a lot of information in a nutshell. So, and if someone has never heard of that, it might be too much information.
It would be too overwhelming, but what we're going to try to do for audience listening out there is that we're going to try to break it down. So first thing first, you mentioned that you use a water filter. Now, you also mentioned that it eliminates 99.99% of all the things which a lot of people don't realize that is in our water supply. These things are heavy metals, pesticides, microplastic. You mentioned fluoride. In US, fluoride is a big issue. And what we want to do is not put our body through this extra stress of detoxifying all these minerals, because some of these will get stuck to our bodies. And like they say, prevention is better than cure. So I get your point that you have an electrical, you have a device which takes out all the bad stuff from the beginning, things that we do not want into our body. And then other thing which is important, which is recently got a lot of interest, is the alkaline to pH balance. So does your, now that it is removing all the negative parts of it, is it even alkalining the water? Because normally a water ionizer would generally alkaline the water.
Yes. So correct. So think of that. I'll say something in advance. So you either have a filter or you are the filter. So that means if your body, and this depends on your genetically potential of if you are a good or a bad detoxifier in terms of how much glutathione S transferase you can build in the liver, for example. So this is the importance of the filter. And as you said, yes, to answer your question, this device ionizes the water but ionize is not the correct word. It's not precise because ions can be positively or negatively charged. So, but it's correct. You can increase the pH level. pH means potentia hydrogenii in Greek. And the scale goes from 7, which is from 0 to 14. So 0 being super acidic, 7 is neutral, and 14 is super alkaline. So, and both are, well, not good, because too acidic is bad and too alkaline is really bad. So you have to stay in a certain range. For example, in your blood has a really small margin for pH. It's 7.3 to 7.35 to 7.45. So you have to stay in this particular level. So to answer your question, yes, you can increase the alkaline level of the water up to around, with my device, 9.5. So you can drink basically alkaline water, which is, from my experience and point of view, a very good thing.
You touched on something very important, that is, you can either be a slow detoxifier or a fast detoxifier. Now, you mentioned glutathione, and for people who are listening, glutathione is one of our body's master antioxidants. And normally everyone would assume, for the longest period of time, assumed that I can detox very well, until I got a specific genetic report which says the glutathione transferase gene, which is the GST-M1 gene, in my body is not there. So some people can have these transcription factors on or off depending on the environmental factors. Like how well you're sleeping, what kind of foods you eat. If you eat more broccoli sprouts and you get the precursors for glutathione, you will have more glutathione. But in my case, I have to take special precautions, and I'm not in that tiny percentage of the population. There is a large percentage of the population there that doesn't have the prerequisite genes to manufacture glutathione. So you can do this from getting a genetic report, but I know that everyone who's listening is not going to get a genetic report, but we want you to embrace the idea that everyone is not perfect. Just because your friend, your partner, your boss can drink, smoke, or get toxins in their body and be fine the next day doesn't mean that you can do it yourself. And it is not your mistake. So I don't want people who are listening to this going into a negative perspective and thinking that I'm just weak, I am this, I am that. It's not like that. This is our own biochemical individuality, and we have to respect that. And the reason we're talking about this is so you get informed, and then you take the necessary steps to fill in the gaps, whatever you have. Now, when we look at water, right? And when you look at water as a whole and you put it under a spectrum, the water doesn't have single molecules in like isolation. So water always has a group of molecules which are combined together. And when you don't filter water properly, and when you look at tap water, it has an upwards of like 12 to 15 molecules all tied in together. But from what you're saying and what I've seen in some of the devices is that these healing waters have this specific ability to be microclustered, which means that instead of having upwards of 12 or 15 water molecules together, they're microclustered into 4, 5, 6 molecules. And this, in some traditional medicine, has also shown that gives water the life force or the energy that it has. So do you know if your water restructuring unit is also microclustering it?
Yes, correct. So this is actually the approach, and the one who figured that out was an Austrian named Viktor Schauberger, and I really encourage all the listeners to get and research him because he did amazing stuff. And he showed that the second law of thermodynamics is not correct, because the second law of thermodynamics in a nutshell says if you have friction, heat will occur. And he demonstrated in water that this is not the case, because if water if it flows in a natural river, for example, it can cool down the temperature. So, for example, water has its greatest density at 4 degrees Celsius and not on 0, for example. So to answer your question, yes. The thing is, with restructured is not scientifically termed, but the idea is you want to create a water cluster that has a hexagonal shape, like it is in structure, in nature. And let me explain. So when you drink, for example, or people drink tap water, the water has to be pushed with great force through pipes. So, and it destroys the water cluster's chemical structure, because the pipes normally have 90-degree angles and stuff like that, and it's not how water flows in nature. If you observe, like Viktor Schauberger said, observing nature and then copying it. So we have to observe, and when you observe how water flows in nature, is that it meanders. That means it flows like a snake-like movement. So you will never find a lake, a river, or whatsoever that flows in a 90-degree angle. It does not happen. So therefore, the structure still stays hexagonal. So, and now people say, okay, fancy words. What can I do with that information? Is when you drink natural water that is not contaminated and full of pesticides, chemicals, and stuff like that, you have the ability to absorb it intracellular on a better degree, which means, so think of that. Everybody has experienced that thing. For example, you get thirsty and it is really hot outside, and then you drink something which has it's very acidic, like lemonade, for example, and has a lot of sugar in it. So you drink, your belly gets swollen, but you're still thirsty. And you drink and say, well, I've drunk 2 liters of limo, for example, or Coke or whatsoever, and I'm still thirsty. So this is the problem, because the water in this lemonade you drank does not have the ability to enter the cell. So if you think of a cell has a charge inside and a cell has a charge outside of the cell. So, and to properly, the water, if it wants to enter the cell, has to have a certain structure, and then, which we can talk about now if you want, it has to have a certain charge to be, permeable, being permeable to go into the cell.
Inside the cells.
You know, yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
But also, we've seen a lot of experiments done where, as you mentioned, when water is flowing through pipes, it's getting cut in different ways, maybe at a 90-degree angle, maybe at a 40-degree angle. But when you take experiments like you take, and this will come back to your point of biophotons, that you push water through a tube and it flows in a specific, let's say, energy level. But then if you take a normal pipe and you flow water through it, but now you add a spectrum of electromagnetic energy, which can come in the form of red or near infrared light, you will see that the water flows faster. And when we think about science, the only way for that water to flow faster is by adding high pressure. But in these 2 experiments, we're not adding pressure, we're only adding light. So this was my question in the beginning, that how can water flow with a higher pressure just with light? And that also brings to the point that maybe that light is doing something to the water itself. Instead of being H2O, it is making it an exclusion zone water, which translates into H3O, where you have 3 components of hydrogen. And this is fascinating for me when I first learned about it, because as you mentioned, right, to get something inside the cell, for the cell to be hydrated, it has a negative, 100 minus 150 milliwatts of electric potential. And this water by itself has that kind of potential to be used as a substrate to get into the cells. And when I think about this, I also think about, now let's extend it to something even bigger. Now we have capillaries. Capillaries are these tiny blood vessels, and they're carrying a lot of blood around. But when you look at the capillaries by themselves, they are really, really tiny. They're so tiny that even they're maybe a fraction of the amount of the red blood cell that flows into them. So in nature now, when we are, there's the pandemic and people are spending more times indoor, we are not getting exposed to that frequency of electromagnetic radiation, whether it be from sunlight or the UV rays. There are chances that even in our biology, leaving water aside, that red blood cell is not going into the capillary because there is no pressure. And this is why when you see you're going outside, you're in the sun, people become much happier. And now there's other components to it, like the nitric oxide that increases with the blood, in the blood. But there's also this pressure point, which I found to be very fascinating. What's your take on it? Do you feel that and this again brings me to the biophotons part of it. So when you are infusing your water with those biophotons, do you think that the water coming out has enough pressure molecularly that it is driving right into the cell?
Well, okay, wow, where to start? So you touched a lot of important stuff. So first of all, maybe we must question the thing that the heart is not a pump. So I know this is going against all the mainstream medical things, and I'm not saying it's not a pump, but I'm saying maybe it's not a pump. And there's this book called Human Heart, Cosmic Heart by a medical doctor who describes this phenomenon in a nutshell. Just to say, he says the heart, okay, from a physical point of view, it is way too small to pump, as you said, all the blood in an average tall human body. From a pure physical point of view, when you say, okay, this is the size of the pump, this is the length and the diameter of all the blood vessels, as you mentioned, way too small, way too small. So maybe it's more functional like a turbine. So, and you said correctly that the capillaries are too small, actually, interesting and very fascinating for blood vessels. So an erythrocyte in German, this is the term. So a red blood cell, it has like a biconcave shape. So in the center it's thinner than on the outside. So it looks like kind of a closed donut. So, and if it wants to go through the tiny blood vessels, it has to fold. So, or it has to change its shape, to be precise, to be small enough to be pushed through the vessel. So, and this is the common way of thinking how it functions. But as you said, we are water, and we contain a lot of electrolytes, and this is the important thing. So yes, water alone, a current does not flow in water alone. You need electrolytes. So, and the analysis light means that it is dissolved in something. So electrolytes like magnesium, potassium, and so on, calcium, are solved in our bodily water, inside and outside the cell, potassium, magnesium pump, and all that stuff people heard. So, and to come to your question is, maybe it is functioning like another way, because blood is like, has in its central core, it has ferrum, which is iron. So, and so it can be charged. So, and if you put red light, specifically in a specific red light and near infrared light to the body, and it is exposed constantly, but you cannot see it because it's out of the range of your vision, maybe this red light charges our human battery, the electrolytes we have in the body, the good metals like the iron in the blood cell, and this closes the circuit and creates a flow. So maybe the blood is not pumped through the vessel, maybe it is, soaked and sucked through this vessel by an electrical charge. So like in a battery, you have the closed circuit, a minus and a plus pole, which for definition is when we are talking about something that is negative or positive, it does not mean that the positive pole is a good and the negative is a bad thing. So take the battery in a car. You would not open the hood of the car and say, okay, it has a negative pole, I cut this out. No, this is just in thinking how it works. So you need something that has lesser charge and something that has more charge for circuit and the current to flow. So yes, I hope this was not too complicated, but you
No, it
touched
wasn't.
a lot of things. So.
You explained it very well. So then, when we think about this energy passing through water, and you mentioned electrolytes and the human battery, which I find to be completely fascinating, because when you think of it, we are actually, all of our cells are like human batteries, right? We have the mitochondria, which is giving us energy. Then we have these specific electrolytes. And I would like to touch on the function of electrolytes, because what I see normally is that when you have water, which is commercially available water, which is normally distilled, the distillation process by itself rips it off of the essential minerals that is there. And as you mentioned, minerals are so important. Potassium, magnesium, chloride, calcium, sodium, all of these are also available in nature. You go to an ocean and you find the same thing. You step into ocean water. The one reason why it makes you feel so much better, I mean, if it's not super cold, is because it has these charge, this electric charge, which also comes from the ground. Because as we know, and is shown in many studies, that the earth also has a negative electric potential. So what you could do is, if you have been hydrating well, and then you are in the sunlight, this is what I tell everyone: when you want to start with the basics, think of yourself as a human battery. Get yourself hydrated enough, step into some kind of an electromagnetic spectrum, which is not your Wi-Fi, but sunlight, and try to remove your shoes and walk on the ground, maybe walk on the beach, and that will help you absorb those negative electrons. The minerals in your body will help increase the electricity, and now with the light you're increasing the force, and thus you get more hydration. And recent times, most of us, we've been focused so much about drinking water, but we forget that not all water, as we mentioned in the beginning, is created equal. And probably, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to take an effort now. It could be using, what I use is like liquid mineral solutions or electrolyte solutions. You could take some very good quality sea salt and add a pinch of sea salt to your water to absorb most of the minerals. Keep yourself hydrated enough, and just make sure that you are kind of interacting with nature, and that will increase your body's energy levels. Because we know that once your cells are dehydrated, your mitochondria hasn't have enough energy, or it cannot do its job properly as well.
Yeah, correct. So think of that. If you burn a human body, everything that is left, depending on the literature, is 4 to 5 grams of electrolytes. So this will declare the uttermost importance of electrolytes. So water is important, yes, but as you said, and I think we agree on that, is that think of that, all functions, all in the sense of everything, will not work properly if you have a lack of electrolytes. So now people say, well, okay, then I eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, and the thing is that, yes, good approach, but nowadays, as I said, it can't be done anymore, because to take in the amount of electrolytes and minerals, vitamins and all that stuff you would need for proper function, you would have to eat, let's say, 50 apples a day. Yeah, because the soil, unfortunately, is due to monoculturing and stuff like that, and is so
Depleted.
correct, yeah, and it's not repleted, and because they use those extreme monoculturing just to produce fruits, for example, apples, let's stick to this example, that look fantastic, but from a nutritional standpoint, it is more or less empty. Maybe it may taste well, but and it looks fantastic, but It's not nutrient dense. It is so empty that you would have to eat a ridiculous amount of fruit and vegetables. Most people don't have the time and money to consume, because it would be a day consuming activity just eating all the time. And there's someone who has written a very good book, is Robert O. Becker, medical doctor, and this is a very good book. I just forgot the name.
It's an intense read. The electric body electric.
Yeah, correct.
Was it the body?
Yes. Body electric. But because you mentioned that you think of the body as a battery, you can see that on your palms and on your foot, you have the negative poles of the body. And that's why you can get charged when you walk on the beach or in the forest and stuff like that, because you're earthing, you're grounding, and you're reabsorbing electrolytes that you will get rid of. Because think of that, from almost day one on, we get isolated because we wear shoes, which I like to call foot prisons if they are not barefoot shoes, because they compress your feet and they have a rubber sole. So you're insulating yourself from the ground. And when you walk in the city or something like that, you do not work on earth. You walk on concrete or and stuff like that. So you're losing all that energy, and just like your cell phone needs energy, you need energy too, and the battery has to be recharged. But in our very unhealthy lifestyles, in constant stress, which is another thing that leads to depletion of your battery's energy, you have way too less things that focus on recovery. And this was the thing you mentioned initially in our discussion, that people work really hard, but the bottleneck always is the recovery. It does not depend how hard you train, for example. It's always how well and fast you can recover from that stress. You destroy things during training, then you have to focus on building them up as fast as possible.
What is the temperature in Germany right now?
Today, I didn't check it, but I would say something around 3 or 5 degrees Celsius. So it's still pretty cold. Yeah.
Do you take the time to go outside without shoes?
Well, to be honest, not in during this temperature, no. But I wear, at least I wear barefoot shoes. So I always try to get a proper postural structure, but I do other things. I sleep on the grounding mat, for example, and stuff like that. So if I cannot go to the forest because it's too cold, and to be honest, you don't have always the time. This is not an excuse, because people say, "Oh, I don't have the time," but I still have to work and I have to do things, and so I'm looking for a kind of shortcut to get all those stuff in without going out. Of course, it would be better to be outside, to disconnect from all this social media and all those frequencies, which is really hard to do, because even when you go to the forest, Germany is not that big, so compared to other countries, so we still have Wi-Fi connection in the forest, which is rather bad thing with the 5G and 6G stuff coming up. So yeah.
I like the point that you mentioned there, that there is always an option, especially, I mean, for you guys, it's a bit cold, but here in the Middle East, in the desert, it's a good temperature all the time to go outside walking barefoot. But reality is, in our world, we just don't have the time for it. And that doesn't mean that you have to discourage yourself from going out or getting the same kind of energy from going out. And what you mentioned, which I wanted to come to, is that you have all these biohacks and devices that you can use to generate the same. Like right now, I'm standing on a standing desk, and under my desk is a mat, a grounding mat, which I have plugged to the ground. You can plug it to the electrical circuit if you're the country that you're living in has that kind of a circuit, or just plug it into the ground. I've plugged it into my yard, and while I'm standing with you, I'm having water which is enriched with minerals. Before this interview, the red light was on, and even while doing most of your work, you can get a certain percentage of healing. So there is no, just because you don't have the time or your environment doesn't allow for it, try to get new ideas, new ways in hacking it. And this is why we're having all this conversation at this moment. What about vortexing?
Yeah.
What's the
Okay.
deal with vortexing?
Well, vortexing is the thing I mentioned Victor Schauberger found out. So that he found out that water's creating, if it's flowing properly, a kind of vortex. And the vortex is that it's like, if people never heard of a vortex, it looks like, yeah, a kind of, yeah,
Tornado.
tornado, but the tornado is on land, so I was struggling with
Mm-hmm.
this with the example, but
Yeah.
correct, the shape is the same. So, and this is what creates the hexagonal, so the water cluster you need for proper getting the water into your cell, because you don't want all the water to stay in the extracellular milieu. You want it to be in the intracellular milieu. So that means in the cell. So, and when people, there's always a debate to let me add this, that people say, yeah, basic water, and you have to have an alkaline diet. Yes, but you also need acidic stuff, because that's why it's called amino acid, for example. So, but to stick to the level of the cell, the cell inside has to stay negative and the outside has to stay positive, because that that it will function properly, so it can pump things out and absorb things that have to be inside, and vice versa. So, and that's the same on a bigger scale when you think of your human battery. So you start with the digestion in the mouth, which has to be alkaline. Then it goes into the stomach, where it has to be acidic, and there's an uttermost importance of having enough hydrochloric acid, um, so that the stomach acid really is acid. And then it goes to the next part, which is the duodenum. This is in German, this is the term. It's called the 12 finger intestine.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it gets alkaline again. So, to make this clear, you need alkaline stuff in your body. You need electrolytes, but you also need acidic stuff. And then you need a vortex to create a water that enables all those negative and positively poles to flow, so that you create a constant and properly flow of current in your body. So on a cellular level as on a bigger level. So this is like in the Kybalion, the hermetic laws, as inside as outside, in the big as in the little, left as right, and so on. So it is again thinking in principles.
So, what's the best way to vortex the water? How do you use it? Do you use a
Okay,
bottle?
so
Do you use a glass to vortex? Like, do you just, I want people to, because now people have an image of a tornado, and most of the people who are listening to this will somewhere or the other in their lives come across a water which has some kind of a vortex inside. But how long does that energy from that vortex last? Can you do a bottle and then like have a bottle equivalent of a vortex and then transfer it into a glass bottle and take it outside? Will you still have the effect, or do you have to do it in a glass and then drink that glass straight up?
Well, okay, interesting question. I cannot give you an answer to that, how long it will last. I would say, yeah, I don't think it will last a long time, but prove me wrong.
Me neither.
I simply don't know it, but I would say, from an intuitional standpoint, I would vortex it and immediately drink it. But because it's the same with alkaline water. If you put it, you can put it in a glass, but then the glass has to be as dark as possible, because the light will destroy the upsplitting of the H2O. And to answer your question, I use a special device so that when I open the tap water, the water goes through this special device that creates the vortex. Then it gets filtered, ionized, and enriched with biophotons. But there are good companies. There's a company in Switzerland that builds a manually device, and it looks like it's made of acrylic glass, and it looks like kind of a funnel, but it has to have a certain geometrically shape. You cannot just use an ordinary funnel. So you have, again, Google Victor Schauberger, and then you will get into all that stuff. But in a nutshell, you have a funnel, and the water has to flow from the side into the special created funnel, and then gets narrower and narrower. And on the downside bottom, then it is vortexed. And then I would drink it immediately.
This, you've answered two of my questions, because the next question I was going to ask you is that if vortexing is just spinning of this water with energy, can you use a normal blender or a normal device to vortex? Because years ago, when I first found out the work of Gerald Pollack from the University of Washington, I did not pay a lot of attention into it. And what I was doing for, I think, 1 week, and then I got tired of it, was just using my NutriBullet to stimulate some kind of a movement. And then it was just not convenient, so I stopped it. But now, in preparation of this conversation, it just took me back to that time. And I just had to ask, because people might imagine a vortex also being created from a NutriBullet or some kind of other mixing devices. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have to use a device which specifically does this. Have you heard or come across biogeometry?
In terms of what specifically?
In terms of just, so there's these different, like you mentioned, these geometrical shapes and designs, which when energy passes through them or water passes through them, it neutralizes the energy frequency, the electromagnetic radiation, so that it doesn't, for in some reason, in a better word, like attack your cells and your body.
Yes, but I'm not a specialist in this to say, but I know that, and I think and strongly believe that geometrically shapes like the flower of life or the Metatron cube and stuff like that have special abilities on your body. So, and respectively on a cellular level, but I'm not an expert into that.
Do you think if you tattoo one of these geometric shapes on your body, then life becomes better?
To be honest, I have thought about that a long time. Because when you think of the work of Masaru Miyamoto, who said that you can
information,
correct, so maybe. But then I struggle with the idea, because when you get tattooed, the tattoo is in your body. So it might move to your lymph system and might cause more harm than good. So maybe, but from a human point of view, I mean, we are humans born without those stuff. So every symbol maybe will have an influence, an impact to your cells and to your body as a whole, positive or negative. So that's why all those things work in the world we live in, a world that is constantly, how can I explain that not to sound like a conspiracy theorist? It is a world of symbolism we live in. So all those symbols have an effect on the body. But think of that, we are born without symbols on the body. So I don't think from a natural point of view that we need them on the body. But I can understand why certain culture do it. I'm not a fan of it, to be honest. So
I was just asking because a week ago I've been wanting to get a tattoo for the longest period of time, and one of the biggest struggles for me is so I am the kind of a person who clears dopamine out of the system very easily. So that in normal term means that I get bored very fast of things.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, I think that's one commonality with everyone I speak, especially on the podcast. that the continuous desire to not like just look at the next good thing and just understanding and embracing it and increasing your personal growth or your knowledge. But 1 week ago, I was talking to one of my friends, and we've just been talking about these tattoos, and suddenly it kicked my brain that what if I was always wanted to do something meaningful, and then what if I actually design or get a tattoo design in the shapes of these biogeometrical figures, like you said, the Metricons cube or the flower of life or the tree of life, like all these things can. And I'm just at this point, it was just an idea that crossed into my head, so I thought, let me just ask you your take on that. Now, we've spoken so much about water, and I think a lot of people are just going to benefit so much from this conversation. I also want to touch on something that you mentioned early on your introduction, or how you got introduced to Charles, which is the bamboo bench. Now, for someone who's thinking or just listening to this conversation, their imagination is all over the place. So can you please describe for us what is this bamboo bench?
Okay, yeah. First of all, it's not made of bamboo. This is just for, like I said, a symbol.
No way. You disappoint me. I thought I will have some more bamboo structure in my house. Okay,
No,
let's go on.
unfortunately not. But so this is a device I created because I had coming from this bodybuilding background, I always had issue in the tissue with my right shoulder. So like everyone who's regularly visiting a gym will inevitably or eventually experience shoulder problems when they are doing a lot of bench press. And it doesn't matter if the bench press is with dumbbells, barbells, inclined flat on the machine or whatsoever. But the problem is that, and I start with the problem and then I explain how I came to the solution, is when you lie on a bench or sitting on the machine, your shoulder blades are fixated. So that means they cannot move as they're supposed to be in a natural structure or movement. So let's say you're doing dips, for example, push-ups, or you're working your chest on the cable cross, then your shoulder blades can move freely. And why should they move freely? Because the movement of the shoulder blade is involved in the movement of the shoulder, depending on the angle. If it's but especially when it is so when the shoulder, you do an abduction and you rotate out externally, like it's in the bench press, for example, then you create, and you're lying on a conventional bench or sitting on a machine and your shoulder blade is fixed, you create a lot of mechanical stress in the rotator cuff. Why? Because it is not very properly designed. So the shoulder joint has a lot of movement, a lot of range of motion, but the socket of which we call pan in German of the joint is way too small for the head of your humerus, so the bone of the upper arm. So, but it has to be this way to enable this great movement, and therefore the joint is only saved by ligaments and muscles, so to enable this great range of motion. So, and then you have the tendon of the long biceps head running from downwards, upwards, and then you have the supraspinatus. So, and when you abduct the arm and externally rotate, the already narrow shoulder joint will cause friction of these tendons. So this will eventually lead to impingement or a pathology called frozen shoulder. That means from a specific angle, 60 between 120 degree, you have pain by lifting, doing dumbbell raises or working overhead and stuff like that. And so I came up with the idea, okay, what if I can narrow the space so that you are lying on your cervical spine down to your buttocks, so and you can still perform a pressing movement, doesn't matter if it's flat, incline or decline or on the machine, and then you can eliminate or at least reduce to an extreme amount of mechanical stress in the rotator cuff. Plus, you can enhance the range of motion, which will eventually to more recruitment of muscle fibers. So we have two good things: reduce the mechanical stress, plus you add more range of motion, which, as we spoke initially, will lead to theoretically more hypertrophy and or more strength, in a nutshell.
That was a very, very good description. And now I think a lot of people, including myself, can obviously, I'm looking at you on video, and while you were explaining all these things to me, I was moving my shoulders back to understand why have I been injured so many times. Like as a person who was trying to train for CrossFit competitions, I've faced these kind of injuries a lot just because of the nature of these exercises coupled with the intensity. But you're saying that even a normal person who goes to the gym, chances are you're more likely to have this problem just because, not because you're doing something wrong or not because you aren't putting in the effort, it's because how anatomically your body is structured. Now, when I saw the bamboo bench, I honestly, full disclosure, I thought it was made of bamboo and it was just like a covering after the bamboo. But when I was trying to imagine of its function, I also felt that that extra range of motion includes this. Also, you're, again, when you're moving some kind of like a weight through space, and you're putting all this weight on your cervical spine, that also engages a lot of balance and stabilization, which you would not have from a traditional bench. And I've seen a few studies where stabilization is probably one of the other key factors to also increasing things like, now when you think of a stabilizing, you're also thinking about your body's reflexive, like the way your reflexive muscles fire, just to keep you like upright and in balance. But that also in so many studies have shown to increase growth hormone levels. And this is probably why you're even seeing better result apart from the structural damage that would occur. I think it is also a very good, in my perspective, way to increase some of those neuro firing and increasing stabilization in the muscles, so you get a better hormonal output by using a device. Now, this device, it comes with Velcro straps, and you can attach it, for people who are listening, to an average bench. You don't have to have a special bench for it. It is not something that is super heavy that you have to like carry around. It is just an attachment that goes on your bench and creates that space where you get that increased range of motion. And we think about this as one of those, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's one of those tiny tools that you can add to your arsenal and which creates a big difference into your life. Now, when you're using the bamboo bench, do you prefer using for all your sets? And does it have any other application? I mean, in terms of apart from doing it in a bench press or maybe doing it in a fly, can you use the bamboo bench for something else, like in any standing movement, or that is not recommended?
Yes, of course. So let me add that you're right. So what wires together from a neurological point of thinking fires together. That's correct. And I always explain it is like riding a bike for the first time without those little assistant wheels. Yeah. So it is a bit shaky, and your brain has to learn a new movement because doing bench press, doing flies, doing this and that, working on the machine, your brain has learned a certain neurological pathway and says, okay, now it's Monday, I'm doing International Chest Day, and I'm doing chest, and chest is this and that. So, and now it gets, oh, whoa, what is this? So, yeah, it has to say, oh, I have to learn something new. So, we're learning something new. And then, of course, you can use it with, as you said, with pretty much any bench. I've tested, I've honestly have not seen a bench yet from a manufacturer that it doesn't fit on. So it's 1 meter long, so that it's built for small people and for taller people, and you can carry it everywhere. You can just clean it. It's from artificial leather is the surrounding, so it's not made of any animals. And the point is,
those are for your vegan folks.
Yeah, for example, I mean, yeah, why not? You don't have to make it from leather. You could, but then it would be way too expensive. Yeah, why do?
Mhm.
There's no necessity. And yes, to answer your question, of course, you can use it with any machine. You can use it. Doesn't if it's plate loaded or stack weight, doesn't matter. You can use it with dumbbells. You can use it for flies, and you can use it for all the other exercises. For example, like reverse flies. Think of that. That because the problem occurs too when you're sitting on a machine with your back and your fixed shoulder blades again, and then you're trying to do this movement, yeah, on a machine. For example, you can do it with for rare deltoid, or I created an exercise that is called Stößlein, which is my surname, Stößlein face pulls, using the bamboo bench. Because think of that, face pulls done correctly is a very good exercise for your rhomboids, you're stabilizing your shoulder girdle. But the problem is, it's most of the time it's done incorrect, because people, they stand or either sit and then they do the face pull like this, but the problem is that they're shaking too much. The work is coming too much out of the low back. So when you attach the bamboo bench, for example, on a bench, then you can have two advantages, because you sit on the bench, so your back is fixed and you cannot wobble around, so you cannot use a faulty movement, and you still have enough space for your shoulder blades to move, so you can do the movement without shaking, but still
Mhm.
have the full range of motion in comparison to sitting on a regular bench. So with your back against the bench. So yes, and these are just 2, 3, 4, 5 examples how you can use it. You can use it for floor press, for example, when you're pressing with dumbbells or barbells on the floor, when you want to train sticky points and want to reduce the range of motion of your pressing movement, but still want to have free moving shoulder blades. So the variety goes far beyond bench pressing.
Wow, I love that. I love that you thought about all these things. And again, for people who are listening, this is not coming from a person who just saw an exercise and thought, oh, okay, let me go invent something. It doesn't work that way. These things come from years of experience, years of getting injured, and then desperately probably having a need to solve a problem. And with Bernd's case, you know that he's, like he mentioned, he's been doing this for years. He's been trained in so many disciplines, and he's used all of that knowledge to get something to help everyone, not probably go through what he or his colleagues or what his clients have gone through. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. And also notice what he told about the neurons that fire together. This is a very big component which average people don't think about when it comes to training. You have to challenge yourself, not just in the weight aspect, but also in the other things we spoke about, like the balance. One good example that comes to mind is that you can do an exercise for your legs. Now you could choose to do a squat on with a bar, and this way it's going to be more harder for you, because apart from the weight that you're using, you also have to stabilize a lot. And classically, you can also do this with a leg press, but we know that evidence has shown that leg press doesn't even come close to what you can achieve from doing a traditional squat. So that is the movement of more range of motion, the balance, the neurocircuitry. And if you are getting old, then it's going to be probably the thing that is going to save you from falling down and breaking a hip, which is a big problem because of sarcopenia. Now, if someone wants to look at the bamboo bench, firstly, let me ask you, how much does an average bamboo bench cost?
Well, in euro, it's 99 euro, including
Nine,
VAT. Yes.
okay, 99 euros including VAT. And is this available all over Europe? Do you guys ship internationally?
Well, yes, I have. I don't sell it myself. I have anymore. I have distribution
Mhm.
partners. So that means in Germany you have exclusive distribution partner, and I have, for example, in England, Italy, we have Spain, we have Australia. so far Poland, and I'm not sure if I touch everyone now, but yes, you can, for example, depending on the location. I don't know if you have someone in the United Arabian Emirates, so I have to check that. But yes, theoretically, yeah, you will have access to it all over the world. Yeah.
Amazing. So, everyone who's listening, take some time after this podcast. If you're driving, don't do it now, please. Take some time after this podcast to just absorb whatever we said. Have a look at the work from Victor Schomburg, Gerald Pollack, and make sure you go and check the bamboo bench out, because, hey, if you get injured, you're not going to be able to train. And if you're not being able to train, if you are a serious athlete, you're going to hate your life, because there's nothing worse than sitting at home and not being able to train. With that, I'm so happy that we had a chance to have this conversation together, and you brought in so many new ideas. You answered so many questions, which is very helpful for everyone. If someone wants to get in touch with you to just get in touch, say hi, or maybe just work with you, what is the best way for them to get to you?
Well, you just can Google my name, or you can write me an email. It's the same. You just have to type it correctly, because you have to convert the name into internationally spoken. So it's but I think you can blend this into, or you can write it. So this is the most.
I will help everyone out. Yeah, I will help everyone out with that. I'm going to mention all the links for his website and his Instagram. He's also very active on Instagram, so I will mention all of that. And I really appreciate you being on the show and doing what you do.
Well, CJ, thank you very much for the invitation. And if people like what we had to share, maybe we can do a round 2.
Yes, please let us know if you like whatever we've spoken about, or something that you would like for us to speak about. This is CJ signing off from Shift with CJ podcast. Everyone, have a great day ahead of you.
Yeah, I wish everyone an energetic day. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thank you, everybody.